Chair recognizes the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Loudermilk.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank all the panel for being here. I want to just open with one quick question, yes or no question. Commissioner Mehl, do you agree with the Waters of the U.S. rule? Yes.
No, sir, I do not.
No. Mr. Chilton, do you agree with it?
Absolutely no.
Mr. Hopper, do you agree with it? 75% of our panel just said no, they don't agree with it, but Mr. Kopocis, back in August of this year, you co-authored an op-ed on the Hill that was entitled, "Trump Plans to Roll Back Environmental Rule Everyone Agrees On." Can you define who everyone is? I mean, when I go back to my district, I do not hear this, that everyone agrees with it. So I think that the title may be a bit misleading at the best, but I would say that's kind of consistent from what I've seen in the 3 years I've been in Congress with the EPA has a history of using any means or method to achieve a goal that it wants, regardless of fact, law, or public opinion. And I want to address some of those issues with you today. I think possibly maybe some of the reason you say everyone agrees with this rule is, as you said several times in your statement and responding to questions, was there was unprecedented public comment. And I believe I read somewhere recently that you or someone commented that 87.1% of those commented in favor of the waters of the U.S. Do you recall that?
I don't believe that was a statement that I made.
Okay, but
I mean, that sounds about right.
Okay, the majority of the people were in favor of it. But it's interesting because the New York Times came out in 2015 with an article that uncovered that the agency was actually involved in what the GAO is now determined was an illegal social media campaign called Thunderclap. Are you familiar with that?
Yes, I am.
You're familiar with that. So, in fact, one of your colleagues at the American University stated that the agency is supposed to be more of an honest broker, not a partisan advocate in the process. Now, I was surprised to learn that the agency was actually using social media to generate support for Waters of the U.S. In fact, through a FOIA request by Judicial Watch, the former EPA Director of Web Communications admitted that she did not want, quote, it to look like EPA used its own social media accounts to gain support for the rule, even though you partnered with Sierra Club and some other grassroots organizations. In fact, as I mentioned, the Government Accounting Office stated that you had violated publicity or propaganda and anti-lobbying provisions contained in Appropriations Acts in association with its Waters of the U.S. rulemaking. So, do you agree with the statements of your colleague? In fact, again, Professor Lubber said that a guide to federal agency rulemaking, I have not seen before from a federal agency this stark of an effort to generate endorsements of a proposal during an open comment period. Were you aware of the thunderclap and the generating of popular public opinion during this rulemaking period?
I became aware of the thunderclap incident after it had occurred. I was not. That was something that was handled by our communications staff. We did. I'm familiar with the GAO letter on the issue, where they found some minor violations of the appropriations law. The agency disagreed with the agency's conclusion, with GAO's conclusions, as did the Department of Justice.
Okay, well, I mean, I think most of the people in the country expect our agencies to, when you have a public comment period, to be honest brokers and listening to public opinion, not generating public opinion. But again, and I'll close with this, I think it's been in the history of the agency following this. In 2015, Science Committee obtained documents from the EPA demonstrating the EPA had avoided the regulatory impact analysis process at the Office of Management and Budget. If you recall, there was a question that you have to do an impact analysis if a rule or regulation exceeds a certain fiscal impact on the nation, which was the question. Could we bring up the slide, please? Okay, this was an email that we actually brought up in a hearing when we had Director McCarthy in a while back, and I want you to follow along. Let's start at the bottom of the email. This was an email from Jim Pendergrass, who I think you're familiar with. And basically, in the second sentence of the first paragraph in the last part, says, you relayed to us that Greg Peck said the rule now considered significant that OMB was unlikely to change that designation, and basically that you have to do this impact study. It went on in the second paragraph that the rule is now considered economically significant by OMB. So it would require this impact study. If you go up to the next email, so just got off the phone with Sandy and Tamika. They say that Nancy and Ken know that an RIA may be necessary, but that there are some economically significant rules the EPA haven't had an RIA, even though the law says you have to do it.
The gentleman's time has expired. Perhaps Mr. Higgins, who's next on the list, will yield you some time.
30 seconds.
He yields 30 seconds, Mr. Loudermilk.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And with this, at last, good news. Tamika and Sandy talked to Ken. Ken said it has been agreed that we do not need an RIA. This kind of fits into what we've seen is that the law doesn't matter. The public opinion obviously doesn't matter, and rules don't matter. Do you think that it's acceptable just to make an opinion that you don't need an impact analysis and then go forward with that?
The requirement to do the impact analysis comes out of an executive order, does not come out of a statute or the public laws. It is something that is routinely negotiated between the agencies and the Office of Management and Budget, their Office of Information and Regulatory Affairs, OIRA. And that is something that there were extensive conversations between the agency and OIRA.
Did Gina McCarthy negotiate that?
I am not, I don't recall that Gina McCarthy was personally involved.
Thank you, Chair.